Hey, so we're on, yeah?
Yeah, we're on.
Hey, I'm 𝗕𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. I will be facilitating this discussion, and we have Mohamed Sleiman, Labat, and we have Pekka Niskkanen with us. And we are watching two films today, and this is a project. It's an artistic, multimodal artistic project. It's called 𝗕𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, and this is basically a project that is looking at issues related to phosphorus pollution in Baltic Sea and also touches upon the lives of people who are in the camps at southwest Algeria, Sahrawi people, and a lot of details related to interconnected layers of farming and the mineral and how it affects the lives. So we are going to be watching two films, and post which I will be facilitating a discussion with the artists. And perhaps we just begin with the first film, which is Mohamed Sleiman Labat, who is here, and Pekka is here and would like to not be seen, but Mohamed Sleiman is here, and we may have some issues with Mohamed Sleiman's electricity from his home where he is at in the camp right now, and I think we hope that it stays and he stays with us. So we'll find out, and if he taps out, we just hope that he can come back in. Right, so maybe we begin with the film first.
الصحراء واسعة وكبيرة، ومنين يشوف أحد يحجل له عن ما فيها شيء إلا شيء من الرملة والحجار. غير الصحراء فيها ياسر من الحياة، وحد أصلا إنه يعرف الله الحركة والترحال. كيف نحن الصحراويين اللي كنا بدو سابق للاستعمار، الاستقرار والثبات الشي معنا عرافين له. أيانا نحرث والزرع في الصحراء منين تطيح السحاب. غير بعد اللي غالب على حياة الصحراويين كان اللي سرحت الإبل والغنم، ما قد زرعنا ذي الخضرة والفواكه، ولكننا قاعد نعرفوهم. وكيلنا وشرابنا كان اللحم الحية اللي نرعاه، نشربوا لبنها ونوكلوا لحمها، لا خاسر لنا شيء. منين جينا للوجوء؟ عدنا ناكل ذي المواد اللي تقسم المساعدات الإنسانية، وياسر منها هم اللي ما هو شيء كنا نعرفه، عرفناها إلا هون في اللوجوء. ذي السنوات الأخيرة بدأ شيء من الشباب اللي قرأوا وتعلموا بدأوا يزرعوا الخضرة بنواعها، وعادوا يوكلوا منها عائلاتهم وينعتوا الناس الثانية كيفاش تعدل المزرعة.
من البداية حل عنه لم تراوي
يقل العد كاملة المدة
ترى جاء كم كي
هذا عروق النبات ولا أكل كيسان
بديت تراوي كحك
جيب الزقايد الزقايد هنا هي اللي
يصير الله كي
اسمع لا بالله الحاجة.
فرض تعود متفك ولا ما غادي على الطبقات؟ ما طبقات الكور هاي اللي تراك
طبقات الكور غير بعدين تليان ولا يدقدق ولا شيء.
ايوه فرض عليه تفك
تعود متكتلة ما ادري يخرج ليش.
والطبقات تعود كم غلطة كم سنة.
ايش هذا كومبوست؟
باغي تحت الأصداء.
اصلا العالم قاعد ما يخليها تعود احنا في العصا الجديدة اللي مزيات متفكة، وهي اللي استخدمها ذاك الاستخدام. حق
تدرك ترى هيك علت تشترين بدش شرطة. ها ما جربت تعدل؟
اصلا قد تعدلت شغال.
ما قلت لك ذنبت؟
لا شيء تصير تعدل، عدلت الكومبوست. هذا مو كومبوست، هذا تيرو. هاي تراب ملقوطة ذنبتها.
ها؟
هاي تراب ملقوطة ذنبتها، تراب الغابات.
ها هي ترى بيقطع ذنبت. حركت حرك زين والله.
بيهم شو كثير. شيخ هذا كذا النعناع. خلاص اني يتحلل. انا كذا حللت وذا
الجو خلص.
يتكسر وقانا وكذا. انا لا هاي التراب ايش كحلل. هذاك اللي شفنا الأوراق والعودان هذا كامل خالط رايح تحت الغابة وجابر السحاب متحلل وتودي التراب.
دي المزارع العائلية اللي أبليدها ما هي كبيرة حتى عند أي عائلة، تزرع فيها شيء من الخضرة وتعود تأكل منه، كلها يزرع اللي قد حسب قدرته. المزارع قريبة من العائلات وبعد تقد تشوف شي أخضر قريب منك وتذوق طعمته وتشم رائحته. هذه الطبيعة القاسية وتحديات الحياة اليومية في صحاري الحمادة، المزارع العائلية تقد تخفف من المصاعب وتخلق شي زين في بليدة متينة وواعرة. الناس تحل مشاكلها باللي جبرت، كل حديدة وكل عود وكل حبل يقد يسند شي، والله يكظوا والله يسكن، والناس تعدل حماية المزارعها باللي قدت. ما حد نبدو وروح في الصحراء، ما كنا نفسدوا ولا نبذروا، اللي عندنا من شيء نعدلوا منه شيء. اللي بلو الغنم نستغل جلودها وعظامها وشعرها وبرها وفرسنا ونعدلوا منها قلبنا وحبالنا وخيامنا ونوكلوها وندواو بها. غير ذا دهر ثاني الناس ما طلعت عندها يبلها كيف كانت، ويا سنة ذيك الممارسات ضاعت مع الزمن، غير الحرفة ما ضاعت. مازالت الناس تحل مشاكلها باللي متاح لها واللي تقد.
هذه السلطة غير بعد هاي السلطة هون، هاي السلطة اللي تكلمك عن هذا طويل تهرد من هون ويفصل يمرق. نعم ومال من هون نورمال ما يرقين شوف وفاقين واحدين تحت يسلك.
ذي الحمادة الناس نبتة مطيش والبصل والفلفل والشوقة والخيار والقزبور والنعناع والحبق والكرموس ويا ياسر من الفواكه ما كنا نعرفوه سابق ذا. النبات بالحسنية نقول له الربيع، من فصل الربيع لعل يعود بينا كنا نشوفه ياسر من الخضار والنباتات منين يجي الربيع. ذي الجراد اللي عاد فيها شوي من الخضار تحج لنا شوي بذاك الربيع وشوفته وريحته.
بما يمتقب من تحت تنقطع تم لحي بيفون فاهم. حتى لو ما ريت تمشوا تطلع وحدات جديد شفت طلع زهرات وفم الزهرة تحول شور هاي تم ذا كيف تقدي له عام جيت وجيت انا مجبر حياتك ما تموت. هاي ما هي موسمية عيد. المشكلة عنها لا الحر اللي ياسر ما هي تتحمل. هاك فراولات
خارج ياسر من الصعوبات والتحديات الحقيقية اللي تصعب الزراعة في المخيم. الشمس حارة والعجاج وريفي يحرقوا النبات ما طمقع إلا قلة الماء. الماء قليل حتى في المخيم إلا يقسم بالطون على العائلات. وفي الصيف ما تلاقى حد يقدر يبتشي من متن الحر وانت تسلك الناس قاع وحشيش. المزارع العائلية علمت الناس ياسر من الحلول. التقطير والزراعة المائية يحلوا مشكلة قلة الماء. البيوت البلاستيكية والتضليل يساعدوا في حماية النبات. وعرصة الغنم يقدر يعدل منها سماد زين يحل مشكلة فقر التربة من المواد العضوية. وتعلمت الناس ياسر المسائل ما كانت تعرف ذي المزارع العائلية. عادت الناس تتكلم عن التربة والبذور وموسم الزراعة وطرق الري بالتقطيع وطرق حماية النبات من الحر والريح وشين الطبيعة في هذه الظروف القاسية. ذي المعلبات والحبوب اللي تتكرر كل نهار السنوات كاملة قطعا سبت فقر الدم ومشاكل صحية ثانية. وعاد لازم يفكر في شيء ثاني يصلح الغذاء في المخيم. قطعا وكيل الناس تحسن بهذيك الخضرة اللي نزلت الوجبات اليومية. ما خارج شيء أزين من حد يوكل ذا اللي ينتج بيده. ريحة النبات وطعمته بنسمته تحس عنك عدلت شيء مهم وشاركت في نمو الإنسان والنبات والأرض. الصحراء ما هي إلا بطحة دخنة وتوف. راية ترابها تسافر قاطع البحر والمحيط. وحد شافه يقد يقول اللي أنا أبغى طاحت على الخضار وتوف. هذيك النبغة الدخنة هي السر في ذاك الخضار. احنا ما نعرفه ذا غير قالوا عن ذاك الغبار رافد معاه جزيئات الفوسفور وهو سماد ذيك الغابات ذيك السهول اللي يطيح عليها. كل شيء يعمل صغير ويدخن وهي قاعد يقعد يطعن كذا. الرمل والغبار غير عنده دور في الحياة ودور مهم تحنيه الغابات واشجارها والسهول وخضارها. ريعة الصحاري كانت يقولوا عنها خضرة في سالف الزمن خضار هذا يقد يعود مزال إلا أسرار غير بعد شوي بشوي دورة خضار قطرة قطرة يسيل الواد كيف يقولوا أهل الصحر. منين تقعد عند شي من ذا النبات إذا هو لك ساكن ما يتحرك وتجيه عاقب ذاك إذا هو عاد أطول وأكبر معنى ذاك عنه حتى هو يتحرك لا عنه يتحرك بالشعور غير بعد يكبر وينمى بلا حس حتى الربيع يرحل ويتحرك لفوق. الحركة والسكون سر من أسرار الحياة.
I remember when I was a kid, we had to take siestas, we have to take naps in the daytime, around midday, because it's too hot, and my parents always asked us to take the siesta, and it was not fun all the time, but we had to do it. I understand. I remember something always funny. When we wake up, we would be, competing, drawing the maps on our clothes. The maps were of the salt, of our sweat. We were always sweating, and something I remember that because we were drinking salty water back then, the salt would always come out in our clothes, and it makes certain shapes, and we call them the maps. And we always competed on, following those maps and those shapes in our bodies and in our clothes. There's a lot of salt in the water we drink, and our bodies, release the water, release the salt in the sweat when we sleep. Water is something important. My grandmother had a goat skin in which she kept water, and this black substance, I don't remember the name, but it keeps it cool all the time, and it was because it's old and because it's stitched in this old way, it's sometimes dripping, and it's mounted on some sort of a tripod, just 3 wooden sticks attached from the in the upper part, and they're holding this goat skin full of water. And it's dripping a little bit, and I remember I was going under it, and it was dripping sometimes on my face or some parts of my body, and it was cool.
So my background comes from the nomadic community in Western Sahara. My parents were nomads in Western Sahara, which is in a bit the area between Morocco, Algeria, and Mauritania, facing the Canary Islands. There was a war in Western Sahara until 1991 because Morocco occupied Western Sahara. They are interested in the phosphate mines and other riches as well, the fisheries and agricultural potential. And a whole nomadic community was dislocated in Algeria. My parents met in these refugee camps in Algeria, in the south of Algeria, like in the western south of the Algerian desert. People set up camps there, like tents and stuff. Then they started to build like with mud houses, with mud bricks. Now there are like about 5 main camps, housing about 170 to 200,000 people. I first heard about phosphate from my father, who was a nomad in Western Sahara back then. The nomads were moving across the place, all the area where the phosphate mines are now, around Bukra and 𝗕𝗵𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗃 and all the area. Of course, they didn't know about it because they didn't have the scientific knowledge of finding the different minerals. Their connection to the land was on a different level. It was poetical and philosophical. It was about the memory and the experiences and the stories of everything they did around the area and how they say it and how they tell it in poetry and in stories. While the Spanish came for economic profits, for making profits from the area. And they dug, my father said, maybe it's the ants in the ground who actually got some of the precious mineral, the phosphate, out. And it was very close to the surface. They didn't have to dig very, very deep to find it. It was with a human capacity, you can find it. I didn't know about the story of phosphate in the Baltic Sea until I came last year here. Then I learned about the problem, also the other side of the story, the phosphate, and how phosphate is largely used as a fertilizer in agricultural activities and creating eutrophication. Which is a big problem here. The scientists are talking about this area in the bottom of the sea, which is becoming like desert. A very interesting contradiction that, there is a desert with a lot of phosphate, but no agricultural activities. And there's a sea with a lot of agricultural activities creating a desert in the bottom of it. It's just mind-blowing. So it really intrigued us to
But as a grown-up, my experiences with water in the camps were not always as exciting. Actually, they were scary experiences because it always brings back memories of the floods in the camps, and whenever it rains nowadays, if I'm in the camps, it always makes me nervous, and it always reminds me of the destruction that the water is going to melt away the mudrooms that we live in, and we're always in this constant fear that the rooms are going to collapse at any moment. But last year something changed. When it rained, I was not anymore thinking about the rooms, but I was thinking about water for the garden. And for the first time, I'm running around the house and opening up plastic buckets and just putting them outside so that we could collect the rain, and spreading plastic sheets on the ground close to my garden and just allowing those plastic sheets to cover as much water as they possibly can for the garden. And I remember putting all sorts of junk plastic things close to the bottom of where the water was dripping from the roof. And I was gathering little water for my plants, and that was a different experience for the first time.
Hey, I can be on. I think we've lost Mohamed Sleiman, because for the ones who might have joined us later, we had a little heads up from him because he's had troubles with electricity back at his camp and his home. And I think he was saying, hey, I'm feedbacking a lot. No. Oh yeah, I know what's happening with the problem. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I was having some troubles with echo. Yeah, but he hopefully is going to be back. So maybe I can ask. There are these queries that I had after I saw these films, and I was very keen to hear what Mohamed Sleiman had to say. But maybe I can ask Pekka, since Pekka, you've been a close collaborator of Mohamed throughout this process, and perhaps you have some insight on this as well. And I understand that this is not something that is of your people, so you may not have the same insight that Mohamed would, but maybe I can ask you and you could tell me or tell us. Basically, I was wondering about this term gardening that is used for the film as opposed to farming. And I understand this is largely to do with, say, the scale at what it is being operated on. But I also see farming as, or like gardening even, as a sense of permanence, that, or embracing the conditions, not exactly accepting them, but embracing them. And I was wondering how Mohamed, and maybe you, because of the collaborations and you know about the project, I wonder how you see this idea of permanence within the context of people who have been nomadic for generations, have been roaming people, and their idea of regions are so different, or their idea of how they engage with landscapes are so different, as opposed to farming and agriculture, which is a lot more the idea of domestication that comes with the civilization that has developed and domesticated agriculture for the purpose. And it becomes an idea of permanence starts to seep into that culture that is related to that. So I was wondering if you have any insight about how the community looks at gardening and how they see it in relation to permanence or settling down even temporarily.
First of all, it's pity Mohamed was dropped out, but
absolutely,
the conditions are very harsh at the moment in the camp, in the refugee camp. It's plus 50. So I think it's electricity cut, simply. I was talking with him yesterday, and he warned about this because it comes usually at the midday when the temperatures increasing. But about the farming, it was development that started 20 years ago, more or less. And the person who is behind it is 𝗕𝗵𝗰. He's agricultural engineer, and he was in one conference with us in 𝗕𝗵𝗃 University in November when we were talking about the family gardens. It's one topic in our research, artistic research. And Mohamed and his family, they started gardening more or less three years ago. It's spreading, and they have two types of gardens, community gardens and family gardens. But for the Sahrawis, it's necessity to get more food and more like healthy food as well, because they are dependent about the United Nations food aid, and they are forced to stay in those spots in the Hamada Desert, in the refugee camps. And of course, this is completely contradictory to the nomadic background and history of the Saharavis when they were going around in Western Sahara. Now it's impossible, and for many of them. There are some still. And so it turned almost like upside down. And gardening, it's a surprise, both for them and for the outsiders. It's possible in Sahara, and it's based on water quite much. They have invented their own mode of water. I call it, it's hydroponic gardening, but water gardening. So you don't really need too much soil and so on. But these are my answers. We have been researching that in this book, Nomadic Seeds. There's explanation about which Mohamed has been writing together with me, and it's a research article.
Yeah, that's true. Even when you mentioned 𝗕𝗹𝘁, I also read about 𝗕𝗹𝘁 and how I think he was one of the first people from his community, from the Saharawis, to have a master's in agriculture, I think, and permaculture design. And I think that's what he brought back to the communities. And also this idea that also connects to the book that you mentioned, because I was thinking about how you are creating a record, because exactly what 𝗕𝗹𝘁 also is doing, from what I was reading, that a lot of the times when there is a process of education or self-education that takes place when you are beginning something that is completely afresh, completely in the land that has not seen these conditions, like these adversary conditions of crops, like the strawberries that I see, is something that really grabbed my attention, because for me, I had always seen strawberries in climates that have colder soil, maybe 16 degrees, 20 degrees. So for me to see that it is possible, maybe whatever variant, there is a sense of education that takes place, because it requires umpteen amounts of tests and trials and errors and failures even. And the fact that you are also, and 𝗕𝗹𝘁 has been recording it, and you have, along with Mohamed, are starting to record this for the book Nomadic Seeds. How do you kind of place this knowledge within the context of book? Do you see it as a handbook in a way, like a guidelines, or a kind of like pedagogical process, artistic pedagogical publication, or do you see it as a record for present and future? How do you understand this? Who's the book for is also something that I would like to understand, because is it also for others who live in similar climatic conditions, for them to kind of learn from others who have worked and tried and reached a different position of this test? It's almost scientific, no? So do you also see it for them, or are you just sharing it with others who would just, I don't know, how do you see people would receive this publication, and who do you think it is for?
The book is, first of all, it's in two languages, like Hassania. It's a form of Arabic, and then it's in English, and it has two beginnings, because Arabic is read and Hassania from the right to left, and English from left to right. It's very important. This is my idea, how I have been understood from Mohamed, for the community, because there aren't too many books in Hassania. This might be one of the first. And there's Al-Masar library in Samara camp where Mohamed is living. And this book is part of the collection of the library. And library has as well a family garden, or it has a garden around it, and they are planting trees. And Mohamed is collaborating with the library, and me too. And the children in the library, it says they have certain kind of days and hours, especially for the children, when they come to read books and talk about them. So it must be a very special moment for them to see and meet Mohamed or to face the book in the library that is done by someone from the community. And it has many audiences, like as well the adults, so they in the camps, so they will get to know like there is outside interest as well for the family gardens. And here in Europe, it gives as a printed form, and it's as well on our website. It gives very specific information about what is happening in the refugee camps where Sahrawis are living in Hamada Desert in Sahara. So I think it has many audiences.
Then also, do you see it as a record? Because I'm thinking of how, if Hassaniya is an oral language, no? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
It's not a written script.
Mohamed is there, by the way.
Yeah, I noticed.
Hey.
Yes.
Hey.
So glad to see you back, or to have you back.
There was a cut again.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's terrible. I've hated it. But
so glad to have you back, Mohamed.
Mm.
Well, we're just kind of having a conversation, and I'll come right back to you because I'd like to ask you the question that I began this discussion with also. But I was just having this conversation with you also, Pekka. Actually, Mohamed, maybe you could. So we're just discussing about the book, and since Hassaniya, I imagine, I believe, is or like, there it is. Okay, yeah. So it's now in a printed form. Fantastic.
Yes, I have the objects book.
Wonderful.
In my hands. Yeah.
I was curious to see or know how you see the text that becomes the book. First of all, maybe because if Hassaniya has largely been an oral form of language, and I know that a lot of songs, for instance, and oral stories have now been and you have also translated some of the poems of the Sahrawi poets, and I'm aware that it is now in the process of becoming a written text, written scripture. So first of all, how you see a record of what is being learned on the go with agriculture and gardening, a process that is so empirical is now being formed into text, and as well as in a text that has been largely oral. How do you see this record making process? Do you see it as a record for the future, or do you see it like a handbook where you just make data for the study, like a scientific process? How do you view for yourself? How do you view the data that becomes the book?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I am actually a little bit ambivalent. I'm not sure. There are efforts to document Hassaniya or write in it. For example, the local authorities here have been trying to write down some of the poems of the poets. But to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any book that is dedicated, written in Hassaniya. So this is probably the first book to be written in Hassaniya, totally. And I know there has been like issues for people to read Hassaniya as opposed to composing like or performing the poems or the songs, because primarily these literary productions are meant to be performed. So the performance and the oral characteristics are as vital and important part of the Hassaniya as the content itself. So there is so when I see, for example, such attempts to write down Hassaniya, it's really good to experiment and see how much we can transmit through this graphic form. It's also to give it a little bit of a chance to Hassaniya to survive through a different medium, because it's an oral language, and like many other languages that has been facing difficulties of other
cultures and languages affecting them and taking over, or the loss of the oral, parts of the language, because they are largely connected also to traditions that are, as part of the whole, culture, is disappearing or affected by, geopolitical, environmental, contexts. I mean, as the Sahrawi lived in Western Sahara, they use the language that is related probably to the kind of landscape, the kind of practices, the kind of weather that they lived in. It's a totally different thing here. So we're seeing, people, speaking slight, variation of Hassaniya that is responding, like naming things a little bit differently. Or, so for example, when I noticed my father, given, still using some of the old names of objects or things that I myself don't know, because he lived in Western Sahara, he knows those objects and those things, and we don't know them anymore. I'm really happy that there is kind of an attempt to bring up Hassaniya in such a way. Of course, writing this book in Hassani is an artistic decision. I very much would like to bring Hassaniya to the surface. Of course, we speak also Arabic, and a lot of people, some of my friends will comment that, why don't you write it in Arabic? Well, there's a lot written in Arabic. This is an endangered language and dialect that I would like to bring up to the surface. And it's as much important as any other aspect of life, the life of the Sahrawi, the nomadic practices, the desert knowledge, the oral history and wisdom that is, facing the danger of disappearance. I hope this would trigger more and more ways to write down Hassaniya or bring it to other mediums to the world.
Yeah, but maybe then I can also just touch upon this and link to this question that I really had for you, essentially, that Pekka also responded to, is this idea of permanence within the moving communities, within the nomadic communities, the Saharawis. Because agriculture, well, it is gardening, and I know that largely due to the scale that you're working with, it's not really farming yet. But the idea of gardening also brings a sense of permanence of place. And I understand that even with self-determination in the future, with hopefully the referendum coming through and the movement continuing, the knowledge would still continue. Like, of course, it doesn't have to be based in region, but the knowledge is still mobile. But I don't think you can speak for everybody when I ask this question, but how do you look at this sense of permanence that comes from agriculture? Because we know how historically people who have cultivated land are also people who have stayed and who have civilizations have blossomed around domestication of land. So just this idea of because if there is a sense of, well, embracing the conditions, not necessarily accepting them, but embracing what it is, and how you see this idea of this contradiction of the nomadic people and agriculture, which has always had a tense sort of relationship.
That's a very interesting question. What we are witnessing here in the Sahrawi community is kind of two different generations. One is slowly giving way to an old way, and an emerging generation with the new identity and a new set of practices and new knowledge and new way of looking at life. Of course, we are very much connected to the older generation and the old way of living, as we come from that background. But as the Sahrawi were forced to leave this way, they had to respond to so many things, not just regarding food and growing our own food, but also protecting ourselves basically from the elements. When the nomads lived in Western Sahara, they carried the tents with them. But nowadays, this is a different desert. The Western Sahara is a desert, but it's geographically closer to the ocean, so there's a bit of moisture. It's less harsh. As you go south, as you go east more in Algeria, into Algeria, where the camps are located, it's very, very harsh, and there's no hydration, and so tents are no longer supporting that kind of protection that the nomads had. And so slowly people started to build small things, so small mud houses, and then administration things, and then nowadays people are starting to build with cement bricks, because when the floods come, they destroy those mud bricks, and so it's really difficult to keep building. And so that's one aspect of people responding to these challenges through the places and the spaces we live in, the food we eat, and so many other things. So a lot of the things that are emerging in the camps, I don't think people had a decision to plan to make these things. They happen as a response to these challenges and difficulties that people are facing. Yes, it's two different ways of living life. I'm not expecting my parents to respond and connect to plants the way I do, because they were nomads and they were more connected to animals and growing things and being on the move, basically. But there is a lot of things for me to learn as well from that way of life, as much as they can. And so there is always a conversation between us around these things. And so I'm really, really happy to be one of those people to witness this shift in my community. Not everybody was able to, because these processes of shifting from nomadic or hunter-gatherer society happened so many centuries ago that and it happened so slowly. But this has happened so fast within the lifetime of, not even the lifetime, but within few years. And so to witness people settling down and leading a new life and responding to different aspects of life is really like is something that to be celebrated. To sometimes I feel like there is so much knowledge happening, or emerging as people respond to certain things and understanding them and coming up with solutions. It's really something beautiful to be part of. It's sad in many ways that there's also, when we speak about the birth of something, there is probably also the opposite, the loss of something else, and that's in a large sense part of life as well. So I'm witnessing the loss of the oral and the nomadic aspects of my community, but also I'm witnessing the birth of a new life that is the new generation is leading. And I don't know how it's going to unfold, but it's an interesting journey that I'm trying to follow. And through this project, I could be able to trace some of those changes and some of those things that are taking place.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true completely, from the conditions that are also opposing, or especially in terms of the phosphate mining, that has also largely the reason for the conditions that has been created. Also, in some sense, creates these other conditions that allow for something to exist, to thrive, even because of it being, it's supporting the life that would support other lives, I suppose. But I feel like this is also something on the note that we might have to end this discussion. Unfortunately, I have so many more things to learn from this discussion. And also I wanted to understand about collaborations and working with Pekka and Mohamed, working together and within the context of Finland as well. But I feel like it is a conversation we might have to take on another day, perhaps. And I think this is where we end this conversation. And I would really like to thank Mohamed, Sleiman, and Pekka for being with us, and Mohamed for coming back. And I thank the Lords of Electricity for allowing you to be back with us.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this chat, and thank you for your film.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to let
Thank
you
so
go
much
now.
for moderating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
see you around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.